May it please the court.
Yes, sir.
Although this is the state versus Nicholas Godejohn, we knew that. There's been another obvious presence here throughout this trial. And it started Thursday when you came in for jury selection, right? This other presence that we knew had kind of this overarching narrative, and that's Gypsy. Gypsy Blanchard is absolutely a part of this case. And she does have this narrative that many of you may have anticipated would be really a part of the trial, and it is. And she does have a story about her childhood and about how her relationship with her mom and how her mom abused her. But if we're not careful, there can be a tendency to let Gypsy's narrative overshadow what we're really here to decide. Because all along, flying under the radar, coolly, deliberately, was the defendant, Nicholas Godejohn. And while you're considering the evidence, Gypsy is absolutely a part of the facts. But when it comes to your legal determination of the defendant's guilt, which you were given in instruction number 6, she's not. And because she has such a presence, because she has such a story, when you look at how simple murder in the first degree is, it appears as though something's missing. It feels like there should be more, and there could be, again, that tendency to want to take some of the drama, some of the other things that have made this case interesting back with you when you're deciding the defendant's guilt. But it doesn't go. If you look up at the instructions, there is nothing there that references whether or not Gypsy helped plan or whether or not Gypsy asked the defendant to kill. It's not there. Not because we forgot it. It's not missing. It's because when it comes to the defendant's guilt, it doesn't matter. There may be a tendency to consider the victim, Claudine, and how she was, and the things she did, and how she abused Gypsy. But then again, look at instruction number 6. Is there anything there that references her character? We didn't forget it. It's not missing. It's that when it comes to the defendant's guilt, it doesn't matter. All that matters is what the defendant did on June 10th of 2015. And absolutely, you heard as part of the facts that Gypsy did have a role. She was the one to ask the defendant to kill her mom. But we have to be careful and separate out what is collaboration versus manipulation. Because there could be this sense that because Gypsy was the one that asked the defendant, somehow she manipulated the defendant into killing her mom. Let's think about that for a minute. Think about manipulation. It requires some kind of deception. I want to steal a car. So I tell you, hey, see that car over there? The owner said I could have it. It's okay. Could you just go get it for me? That's manipulation, because we're deceiving. Versus, hey, that car over there, I want to steal it. Do you want to do it for me? That's not manipulation. She asked him, but he said yes. And if you think about it, in a way, Gypsy asked in the least manipulative way because she didn't lie at all. She put it all out there. She didn't try to do it through innuendo. She didn't make up things. She just said, this is what's happening to me. Will you kill my mom? There's no manipulation there because ultimately it was the defendant's decision. Nothing was held back from him. And if anything was evident from the dynamic of their relationship that you saw in the Facebook, in the text messages, in the interview, and in Gypsy's testimony, Nicholas Godejohn was not made to ever do anything Nicholas Godejohn did not want to do. And what you saw from the beginning of that request was actually the defendant not only agreeing to this murder, but really getting into this murder. Remember, he's the one that told her, talking himself up, that he's this assassin. And you saw through the text messages how he talks about how don't underestimate his need for killing, how he's getting excited. That's not manipulation. Yes, he was asked to do it, but from that, he took it from there. And he got into it. And he enjoyed it. Now, the issue that you do have to decide, now that we see that no, there's nothing missing, although this is a big, dramatic story, that this case that you are here to decide is quite narrow. We know he killed her. That's not disputed. We know he was trying to kill her. But the real issue is deliberation, right? And whether or not the defendant had the capacity to do so. At this point, there really shouldn't even be any question that the defendant deliberated, because he did. There are psychological things we can look at, and those are important to consider. But at the end of the day, if you're wondering if somebody has the ability to do X, the best evidence is, did they do X? And in this case, that's what happened. Do we wonder, does the defendant have the ability to deliberate? We can think of the psychology, but then put that in context with, what did he do? He did it all the way along for a whole year. Not only that, he described it. And he actually described it quite vividly. In that last interview you saw, when he's describing sort of his final deliberation, the culmination of the year, and he describes literally what deliberation is using symbols, the angel and the devil. And he talks about considering both, and that at the end it was his decision, the bitch is dead. His words. Now, no amount of mild autism, level 1, Asperger's, changes the fact that you heard him describe it in his own words, that he chose the bitch is dead. And so when looking at your decision, which is to decide his capacity to deliberate the moment he murders Claudine, start from that moment and let's think, how did we get there? And you saw a lot of different evidence leading up, but it goes back over a year. You remember this Facebook message with his friend from May 16th. That is over a year, or right at a year, before the defendant murdered Claudine. And as you see here, his response when he talks about how Gypsy changed her mind about killing her mom. Yes, she said she wants to see how our original plan goes first, with me meeting her, and her mom, and such. I guess she wanted to only do it as a last resort. Taking that apart, in that moment, May 16, 2014, the defendant knows that killing Claudine is a plan, that it's in the works. He also knows he's the one doing it, because that was clear from the very beginning. He was going to be the one to physically do it. And he is demonstrating right here reflection, because he's recognizing, one, that murdering is the worst option. It's the heaviest option. It has the most risk. It's the most final. So he even recognizes that that is a last resort. But also, he recognizes that they have the alternative plans. He's reflecting on what the ultimate goal is, to be with Gypsy. And not only does he mention the alternatives, he did them. So when you want to talk about capacity, he did that. You heard, both in his interview and in Gypsy's, they tried it in March of 2015. That was going to be the first plan. Try to get mom to like him. Well, not surprisingly, mom seeing a 26-year-old guy at a Disney movie by himself, that didn't go over great. So plan one didn't work. But it was still an alternative he considered. Then you also remember some of the Skype messages from March where the other plan was to get her pregnant. Again, considering another alternative to the last resort. Then we move forward. Once we get to May of 2015, now we're about a month before the murder, here's what we know. We know that of all the planning Gypsy did, the defendant was given how. And it was his choice to stab. It was his choice to use a knife. We know that. We also know that he wanted tape. He wanted bondage tape. You saw that in the text messages, but more importantly, you heard Gypsy testify to that yesterday, that that was his idea, and that he wanted to do it to muffle Claudine. So again, going back to capacity to deliberate, he clearly recognizes that if you stab someone to death, that's going to cause noise. Causing noise means you could get caught. Using tape to muffle helps prevent you getting caught. No amount of Asperger's, autism, whether you're on the high side of the IQ or the low side, doesn't make that concept any better. He thought of it, and he considered it, and clearly he was doing it. Then when we get to the 19th, where we see he's considering his tool, the tool that he has chosen to do this. And again, he knows he wants to stab her, and he's thinking, he's reflecting, because you see he's even looking at different categories. Tactical knives, SEAL team knife, jungle primitive knife, cold steel trailmaster knife. He's looking at different knives, considering which one of these is going to work best. He's reflecting upon that. And you actually heard, although there was a big deal made of it in opening, the fact that it was Gypsy that gave the defendant the knife, it was his idea to use it, and he told her to get it. And if you recall, he actually told her first to get a machete. Now, we can only somewhat speculate what he planned to do with the machete, but it's probably safe to say it wasn't going to be any better for Claudine than what he did with that smaller knife. But that was his choice that he's doing on May 19th as he thinks about what he's going to do. Then we get to the 28th. You remember the other thing from the text messages and the testimony of Gypsy is that it was the defendant's idea to use a taser. He wanted to use a taser. And she actually testified that at one point she apologized to him for not getting it. And remember what she said, why he wanted it? To keep her from fighting. So let's go back to his ability, his capacity. He knows he wants to murder Claudine. He knows a victim that's not fighting back is easier to kill, so he wants to use a taser. He could have a genius IQ, and there's not going to be any better deliberation on that than what you see. He considered a way to make the murder easier for himself. On May 28th, he also, as you heard, had the capacity to realize they may get caught. And if we get caught, we should probably have a story. And you saw both from the testimony of Gypsy, but even here in these text messages, you see they're starting on the right. Dear, please go with the story. I told my mom and stepdad. And then you see Gypsy responding, please let me know what story. And then the defendant, I'll tell you in person, dear, because I'll be able to explain it better then. That was his story, his deliberation on what would happen if they got caught. And you heard it in his interview. That was the first story he told. When he said, I came up here because Gypsy got kicked out of her house, so I just came on the Greyhound and brought her back. That's their story. But he came up with it because he had the capacity to think ahead of what might happen after the murder. On June 9th, as he's sitting at the Days Inn, he sends this text message, Dear, should I ask you this before he has to? Is your mom a light or a deep sleeper? Again, that didn't come from Gypsy. That's not her words. That is the defendant having the capacity to think, if I'm going to a victim who's sleeping, a light sleeper may awake, may create more of a fight versus a deep sleeper. He's thinking about it, he's considering it well beforehand. And then after he's told that she's a light sleeper, again, he's in his role that he has taken on willingly, and saying that he's excited. Then you have a little bit later, he asks Gypsy, does her floor squeak? He has the capacity to know that when you are creeping up on a sleeping victim, especially a light sleeper that he just found out, something like the floor squeaking could wake her up. That's going to make the murder more difficult. That's all him, all the defendant. You heard about his outfit. You see here where Gypsy asks, what will you be wearing, Mom? His words, his part of the plan, his choice. He says something that will terrify her. It's all black, my evil side pick, the full outfit. So we have the capacity to know, one, that something scary would be a clown t-shirt with evil clowns on it. He was thinking ahead that when I'm sitting on top of her, straddling her, all black, with my black shirt and my black hoodie, what's something that's going to freak her out? How about some scary looking clowns? And he was pretty spot on. As we're getting even closer now, it's June 10th, about 1:11 a.m. He's now making sure he has the right address. He has the capacity to know if he does not go to the right address, that's going to delay, and that could cause problems in the plan. He's given the address, and then just to make sure, upon reflection, he looks it up on Google Maps. He sees how much it's going to cost for the taxi. The gloves. Another thing that was brought up by the defense in opening was that, well, it was Gypsy that handed him the gloves. Well, it was the defendant's decision to put them on. And actually, as you remember from the text messages, even Gypsy texted him there on the right, you may not need to put on the gloves because we will sink it. And she told you she meant sinking the knife. And the defendant, not Gypsy, it was the defendant's decision, no, he's still going to put the gloves on. And you remember his interview, both of his interviews, the one with Maholey, Detective Maholey, and the one from jail with the reporter. He was proud of the fact that you wouldn't find fingerprints. He said that multiple times. And he said, you won't find fingerprints because I was wearing gloves. He had the capacity to know wearing gloves is going to lessen the chance of fingerprints. And then we have probably the most cryptic, which is he's there at the door, and this is the plan. She's going to come get him, and then Gypsy's going to go to the bathroom, and he's going to go do what he's going to do. And typically, in a situation like that, when you picture the defendant standing there, knowing what he's about to do, right, we may have to sort of use inference to determine his deliberation. But we don't, because that's the moment that the defendant talked about where he thought, angel, devil, the bitch is dead. It's at this moment. Then he says that even as he stands outside the bedroom, he waits another minute. So another way, I know you've heard me say deliberate, and you're probably getting tired of it, so I'll pick a new word. The opposite of deliberate would be impulse, right? Impulsive. There is not one part of this murder, of this plan going back a year, that is impulsive. And even in the final moment, where you would think, under emotion, under passion, someone would finally make an impulsive decision, standing outside the bedroom door of the person you're about to go stab, even then, the defendant can't act impulsively. Even then, he deliberates before doing it. That's what this case is. And all of the things we just looked at, all the texts, all the web history, can you tell from any of that he has high-functioning autism? He's not doing anything different than someone else who's planning a murder, taking steps to incapacitate the victim, taking steps in case you're caught to have a story. His mild autism changes nothing about any of the deliberation that you just saw. And even his description of the murder and how he actually stabbed, he even did that deliberately. Initially, you think 17 stab wounds, that must be some kind of frenzy, especially considering how deep the cut to the neck is. But he even talked about that was purposeful. He did that purposely, so she would bleed more. He cut the back of her neck so she would bleed more and die quickly. Even that part was deliberate. So, when you look at it all, there really is no way to see this as anything other than cool reflection. And the fact that he does have mild autism, it doesn't change anything. And when you go back to where we started, these simple three elements, it doesn't change. And even the things you heard about Claudine, how she mistreated Gypsy, I anticipate you'll hear that he had this moment, like you heard in opening, where he sees the wheelchair, sees she can walk. That's no moment of passion. He knew a long time before that she could walk. So, was Gypsy mistreated? Absolutely. Is the defendant some knight that's coming in to save her? Let's be real. You heard his interview. How many times did you hear the defendant mention, oh, I was rescuing her, I was saving her, I was freeing her? I can tell you, 0. In the text messages leading up, how many times did you see him make any reference to, I'm coming to get you, just hang in there, right? You're going to be free soon, I can do this. How many times did you see it? 0. Instead, you see, I expect you to be wearing something specific, red lipstick when I get there, and when I come get you from the bathroom after I murder your mom, you better be naked. The defendant had his very clear own reasons for doing this. So to make this seem like he came in here to save her is completely contrary to everything else you saw.
5 minutes.
Thank you. There's no question that Claudine mistreated Gypsy and that she deserved to be held accountable for that. Absolutely. But she deserved to be held accountable in here. In here. With 12 people like you judging fairly, impartially. That's how she should have been held accountable. All the same rights that the defendant had. All the rights that he has sits there when he stabbed somebody 17 times. The defendant didn't get to hold court himself in the bedroom at 2 a.m, straddling her as she's sleeping, literally stabbing her in the back. He didn't get to hold court that way or hold her accountable that way. That's not how we do it. As I said in the beginning, no doubt, Gypsy was a part of this murder. She bought him the tickets for the Greyhound bus. But without Nicholas Godejohn, nobody's getting on that bus. Her money helped pay for the days in hotel room. Without Nicholas Godejohn, nobody is sitting in that hotel room texting, getting excited, and preparing for murder. She came to the door. Without Nicholas Godejohn, nobody's walking through that door. She handed him gloves. Without Nicholas Godejohn, nobody's wearing those gloves. And she handed him a knife. But without Nicholas Godejohn, nobody is holding that knife and stabbing Claudine to death. Just as you can't imagine this crime without Gypsy, it's not happening without Nicholas Godejohn. Which is why, after you consider the evidence, there's just no other decision than he is guilty of first-degree murder and armed criminal action.